Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're tackling something that's, well, a fundamental part of being human, but it's changing like crazy. I'm talking about our relationship with death.
So, here's how we're going to break it down. We'll start with the deep, evolutionary roots of death rituals. Then we'll see how the modern world has totally transformed them. After that, we'll get personal and look at how our beliefs shape grief. And finally, we'll dive into this wild new frontier, the digital afterlife.
Okay, so let's start with a really basic question. You see animals grieve, right? But you don't see them holding funerals. Humans are the only ones who do that. So what is it? What makes us so different when it comes to saying goodbye?
Well, it all starts with this behavior that, believe it or not, we share with insects like ants. It's called necrophoresis. It's basically the instinct to carry the dead away from the group. Now, for ants, it's just about hygiene, stopping disease from spreading. But for us humans, we took that basic instinct and turned it into something way, way more complex and meaningful, our rituals.
And that really gets to the heart of it, doesn't it? Our rituals aren't just about getting rid of a body. They're a social thing, through and through. They're this universal tool we've developed to do two huge things. First, to physically say goodbye to the person who's gone, and second, and this is so important, to move them from the physical world into our shared social memory.
All right, so we have these ancient, universal rituals, but how have they survived in the modern world? Well, the truth is, over the last century or so, they've gone through this massive change. It's a huge shift from a shared community duty to, well, something else entirely.
Think about it. What used to be a kind of mutual aid, where the whole community pitched in, has now become a service that we buy. The responsibility has gone from this big, wide social network to just the immediate family. And all the actual work, that gets outsourced to professionals. A shared duty has literally been turned into a product.
You can see this playing out perfectly in a place like Mongolia. 100 years ago, the nomadic tradition was simple. The deceased were just returned to the grasslands. But as people moved into cities, that just wasn't practical anymore. So government-run cemeteries and ground burials became the new normal. Fast forward to 2004, and with a growing capital city, they built a modern crematorium for public health reasons. See the pattern? Each step is more complex, uses more resources, and involves more direct human management.
And in Japan, the change was even more stark. Back in the 1920s, most people were still buried. But then, with huge economic growth and not a lot of land, cremation just took off. By the 1970s, it was over 90%. Today, it's over 99%. It is the national standard. It just goes to show you how fast modernization can totally rewrite a country's most basic traditions around death.
And this is where we see the social fallout from all that development. This data from a survey in Asia shows this really clear trend. The richer a country gets, the less likely people are to go to a neighbor's funeral. It's like, as our economies grow, those old-school community ties start to fray. What we're really looking at here is a kind of social fragmentation. The more economically independent we become, the looser our local bonds get.
These changes are so big, so profound, that some researchers are saying we need a whole new field to study them. They're calling it funerology. Think about it. As death care becomes this specialized service we buy, just like any other, this field wants to figure out how that's changing one of our oldest social behaviors. It asks a pretty big question. What do we lose, and maybe what do we gain when we start to professionalize grief?
Okay, so that's how society is changing the outside stuff, the rituals. But what about our inner world? That experience is shaped by something super personal. And that brings us to our next part, how our own beliefs, what we think happens when we die, actually shape how we cope with losing someone.
It's a question I'm sure we've all thought about at some point. Does believing in heaven or some kind of afterlife actually help when you lose someone you love? We tend to just assume that it's a comfort blanket, right? But this one amazing study of older folks who'd lost a spouse, well, it came up with some really surprising and much more complicated answers.
What this study found was that just believing isn't the whole story. For instance, being uncertain about an afterlife, that was linked to more of those intrusive PTSD-like thoughts. Believing there is an afterlife, but that you won't see your loved one again, that was tied to more depression and anger. And here's the kicker. Even a strong belief that you'll be reunited was also linked to more intrusive thoughts. Maybe because it just makes the pain of being separated right now feel even sharper.
So, as the researchers put it, some beliefs can actually be maladaptive. In other words, they can actually be psychologically harmful. Comfort is not a given.
If your belief system is full of uncertainty or if it has a really pessimistic view, like you'll never see them again, it can actually make things worse, not better.
So, yeah, this is not a simple black and white thing. What you believe matters a ton, and how it affects you can even change over time. For example, the study also found that while some beliefs might cause distress at first, about 18 months later, believing in an afterlife was actually linked to feeling less angry. So, belief isn't some simple magic shield. It's this really complex, shifting part of the long, tough road of grief.
Okay, so we've looked at the big societal pressures and the very personal, internal world of belief. Now, let's turn to this huge new force that's messing with both: technology. And it is completely rewriting the rules, not just for funerals, but for mourning itself.
And this intersection of tech and death, it has its own name, Thanatechnology. It comes from Thanatos, the Greek personification of death. It covers everything from online memorial pages and digital wills to AI chatbots that talk like the dead. And it's totally changing how we experience loss here in the 21st century.
This is a massive shift. Mourning used to be centered on physical places, like a cemetery. Now it's moving into virtual spaces online. What was often a private, intimate thing with a clear endpoint has become public, global, and potentially forever. You don't even have to be in the same country anymore to be part of that collective remembrance. A really powerful and kind of haunting example of this is the story of Eugenia Kuda. After her best friend Roman died suddenly, she took thousands of his old text messages and fed them to an AI. And what she created was a chatbot that could text back as him, using his words, his personality. It was meant to be a memorial, a way to keep him alive, but it just blew up into this huge debate about the ethics of creating these digital ghosts.
And that kind of thing has kicked off a whole new digital afterlife industry. You've got companies now that will manage your social media after you die, create online memorials, even build interactive 3D avatars of people who've passed. And of course, this brings up some really thorny new questions about turning grief into a business.
And these technologies, they're a total double-edged sword. The promise is obvious, right? We get to preserve memories, feel connected, leave a legacy. But the risks are just as real. I mean, does talking to a chatbot of your grandpa help you grieve, or does it just keep you from being able to let go? Does it give you comfort, or does it just blur the lines between life and death so much that accepting loss becomes even harder?
So all of these things, the changes in our society, in our own minds, and now in our technology, they're all pushing us to redefine our relationship with the one thing in life that's certain: the end. We've seen how our whole approach to death has moved from this big community ritual to a very personal, psychological journey. And now, that journey is being totally remixed by things like digital avatars and memorials that live online forever. And the speed of this change is just getting faster and faster.
Which leaves us with one last big question to chew on. As this technology offers us a kind of digital immortality, what are we really doing here? Are we finally mastering death, figuring out better ways to remember? Or are we just building more and more elaborate ways to hide from the painful, but maybe necessary, reality of loss? It's something to think about, long after this is over.